Darryn Peterson already missed his second game for the Jayhawks through 5 games, including exhibition play. Bill Self said it was precautionary, but what is actually going on? Is this cause to be concerned for KU?
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on? Derek Johnson here. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day, and thank you to the everydayers catching each and every episode. Thank you so much for making the Locked On Podcast Network your number one sports podcast network. And on this bonus episode of the show, we're going to be breaking down the Darryn Peterson injury or missed game, whatever you want to call it. Is he not injured? I don't know. What's exactly going on? We're going to try to get to the bottom of it. We're going to get into how it could potentially affect KU if it is an injury versus if it's not, and all that on this episode of the show. If you are looking for just the straight recap, what exactly happened in KU's win over Texas A&M Corpus Christi, you can find that as well anywhere you get podcasts, including on YouTube. So let's start right here. So in the post-game press conference, here's what Bill Self said. This comes from Jack Ritter, who does work with Michael Swain over at Fog.net and 24/7 Sports, and tweeted out, he said, Bill Self said Darryn Peterson's hamstring was tight this morning. The head coach, quote, didn't want to risk that, end quote. He described the move as precautionary, though Self looks forward to seeing him on practice on Thursday. Now, we got to hear from Bill Self at a Monday press conference ahead of this game, and he said everybody was healthy for that practice. So we know Darryn Peterson practiced in that. That maybe tells you, I guess, that it was something that obviously happened between then and now. Again, I said tight this morning. Does that mean that they did a morning shoot around and I got tight then, or did it get tight in practice after or something, their press conference? The fact that he said looks forward to seeing him in practice on Thursday, that obviously is the most encouraging part, that he's not expected to miss time. Now, it is interesting because there was a Jeff Goodman report, I guess, supposedly from what I've been told through the grapevine on 3 and stuff, that mentioned him as possibly having like strained hamstring. Now I will say strained hamstring. I'm looking at this just one site, right? myclevelandclinic.org. So I have no idea, whatever. But it says if you have so there's different grades of strains. It says if you have a grade 1 injury, you might need less than a week to feel better. Grade 2 and grade 3 injuries will take longer to heal. It can take up to several months. Now, the fact that he's talking about him being back at practice on Thursday tells me that if this is a hamstring strain, it probably alludes more to, the grade 1. Now, to that notion, if that were the case, would it make sense for him not to practice Thursday and then not to play in the Princeton game? Maybe it would, but it sounds like something that's kind of case to case and day to day. Where this does become a little interesting, though, is like we've gotten all these different, I don't want to say they're not excuses, because again, he's like injured. I'm just struggling to come up with another term. Different reasons, I guess, of why Peterson has like missed time. We got the cramping at the end of the game in Louisville. We got we thought it was cramping, and in the Fort Hays State exhibition, it was that he's not feeling well. So I guess you would assume like sick. And now we get this one in there. It is just it's either worrisome or it's odd. It's worrisome because there keep being things popping up that is preventing him from playing. That would be one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is if you want to take I don't even know if I want to say tinfoil hat theory, because I don't think this is like there's aliens in the KU basketball program. No, it's not like that. But it's like, do you start to like point things together and be like, I've heard some things here or there about the management team being controlling on this or that. Like, is there a level of load management involved here in terms of, hey, we don't want our guy who's going to potentially be the number 1 pick to get injured in one of these silly games. We want to keep him for the real games. And I can see the plus minus of if that were a thing. I would just start right here. I don't think Bill Self would like that, but if you have the number 1 player in the country saying, hey, I want to play for you, but I'm not going to play against, this school, whatever, right? Like, you still take it and you kind of deal with it. Bill Self could play a game of checkers against a 4-year-old and he would want to win the game. Like, that is how competitive Bill Self is. The pluses are that, yeah, you're not, getting a guy injured in a game that doesn't matter as much, and that you should be able to, you won by 30 points, win without him. The other positives is it allows other guys more runway, more minutes to kind of step up and gain some confidence and improve their game. The downside is some of these early games, right? Like College basketball season isn't the NBA season. It's not 82 games where if you miss 10 games, like you're still pretty much there. The college basketball season is a sprint compared to the NBA season. And that doesn't just mean in terms of taking advantage of every moment you have. It means you have less games to find chemistry together as a team. And these types of games where it's a lower stakes in terms of if you mess up, it's probably not going to cost you as much as, say, the North Carolina game, to kind of iron those things out and find chemistry as a team, that's what would be a problem. So I'm not saying that's what's actually happening here. I'm just kind of going through some of the different scenarios if this or that is kind of the case here, because it does seem kind of like a peculiar situation to say the least. So I guess, again, the fact that it is just precaution from Bill Self, if he ends up playing against Princeton on Saturday, then that'll be the case. But then also in the back of your mind, this whole season, you're going to be sitting there going, oh no, is this going to be a Joel Embiid situation for KU, which is certainly uncomfortable and scary in its own right, to say the least. So let's talk about how this potentially affects KU. What players does it affect most? How does it affect the team if you were to miss any extended time, whether it's, the next game or at later points of the season, if something were to pop back up, because this is starting to become more of kind of a storyline. This is Locked On Jayhawks. And today's bonus episode of Locked On Jayhawks is brought to you by the college basketball season is back, along with college football ongoing right now. And I don't know how you couldn't be more excited. The tailgates, the pregame, the rivalries, the energy in the stands or on the court, there's just nothing like it. But let's be real. Actually getting tickets can feel like more of a battle than the game itself sometimes. Endless queues, hidden fees, price jumps at checkout. That's why I use Game Time. It's the app that gives the advantage back to the fans. It's the easiest way to score last minute tickets at the best prices with no surprise fees. What you see is what you pay. You can pull up Game Time in just a couple of taps, see amazing deals. Your favorite college football games as low as, I was looking earlier this morning and I saw KU Utah tickets for their season finale as low as $13 over on Game Time. You can find deals like that. I saw under $60 in like the corner of the end zone. You can find tickets for KU basketball season, all sorts of stuff. You want to go to a Chiefs game, you can find it all, and you can see the seat views from Game Time. So make sure to download the Game Time app today. Use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, use code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off your first purchase today with Game Time. Thanks for joining us on this bonus episode of the show. Again, check out our recap episode where we just kind of more broke down the game anywhere you get your podcast as well, kind of breaking down the potential repercussions of a Darryn Peterson injury here on today's episode. Well, in the short term, you're talking, if he misses the Princeton game, it shouldn't be an issue for KU. In the long term, or I guess the immediate short term after that would be, what's the status for the Duke game, right? That could be a problem. In the long term, obviously, it's a huge deal because this whole team has been built around the idea of you have basically role players around Darryn Peterson. So is it just a collection of role players if you don't have Darryn Peterson, right? And that's a problem. I was kind of like spitballing in my head when you start to like think worst case scenario, is he going to be out like a certain amount of time? How good is this team without Darryn Peterson? Like if you take him away, who are you taking in a 7-game series? Are you taking last year's Kansas team, or would you take this year's Kansas team minus Darryn Peterson? And I don't know the answer. I think Hunter Dickinson would probably have some pretty good totals offensively. I think Flory would be able to beat Hunter down the court in other ends. And then I think like the Council, DeJuan Harris would be a super interesting matchup. That's one guy who's more like slow paced than DeJuan, who's a really good passer. Melvin Council, all the speed and athleticism. DeJuan doesn't really score much. Council is more inefficient, but he can score more. It's like, that'd be a super interesting matchup. KJ Adams and Trey White, like the fact that this team actually has a 4 who can shoot it a little bit. I don't know. Like this team has Tiller. That would be interesting. Like, is there a chance? I know you could go other way. Like, is there a chance that this team, even if they didn't have Darryn Peterson, just based on having more versatile pieces, more pieces that can, Bill Self can get more out of in a certain way, I almost would take this team. And I don't know if that's, I don't know, man. Maybe that's like having too positive of a look at it. But anyway, I think in terms of if Peterson does miss more time throughout the season, or this is more of it kind of a long-term or a bigger deal than it ends up, just being a precautionary thing, who are the players that this does affect most and that kind of need to step up? I think one is Elmarko Jackson. We saw that in this game where Elmarko ends up starting with Peterson out. Like, that should tell you right there that he'd be in, line for more minutes, and obviously more dribbling and creation would be kind of reliant on Elmarko Jackson. I think you'd be really counting on Rosario and Council to have to score more, which you saw tonight. For Kohl Rosario, he had 16 points, but there'd be more pressure on that to be kind of a night in and night out consistent thing for KU if that were the case. And then I think in general, like, you would need shot creation. I can't help but think, like, if Peterson were to miss an extended period of time, do you reconsider having, because we saw some cool moments from Giangallo at the end of the first half, but it still seems like he's behind Jamari McDowell and Jaden Dawson, and I guess Elmarko Jackson, if you want to mention that too, and Kohl Rosario and stuff, and Melvin Council in terms of the guard rotation. But if Peterson were to be out, do you consider jumping Giangallo over Jamari McDowell, or maybe even over Jaden Dawson, because he is more of somebody who can create his own shot? And if you didn't have Peterson, you would need more of the on-ball player who can do that, right? That would be kind of a question to me. And then I would say it would, regardless of that, be a bigger runway of opportunity for Dawson, Ngala, and McDowell, so that one of them could kind of establish themselves at that point in time. But it really just would be a little bit of everyone, right? It would be counted on, like, maybe it's even if Peterson were out in a big game, like, is that a game where you're counting on Bryson Tiller to try to give you 15 points and you're going to try to bully ball him inside and try to play more two big basketball? Like, maybe that's a solution as well. So it would certainly impact everyone, but I think those are the ones that it would kind of mainly impact for KU. As far as how this right now, him missing some of these early games, and how if he were to miss more games in the future will affect KU as a team outside of the individual players, we'll get to that next. This is Locked On Jayhawks. This episode of the show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. The NBA and college basketball seasons are back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game or want to ride a hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who's going to score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So just head over to FanDuel.com, sign up, play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA and the Locked On Podcast Network. All right, thanks again for joining us on this bonus episode of the show. Don't forget to check out our recap show, and thanks for making the Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports network out there. So if he does miss games, how does this affect KU in the short term? If there's more games to be missed, whether it's the next game, whether it's, again, more of this kind of sporadic missing of games that we've seen so far, I think trying to build that on-court chemistry becomes the biggest question here, right? As I mentioned, college basketball season is a sprint. And so what happens if KU, you miss a few games and then the KU lineup without him starts to really play well and everybody's fitting into a certain role, and then all of a sudden Darryn Peterson comes back and now everybody's role is just slightly different, right? Slightly less usage, or maybe you're a little less on ball, or maybe you're getting the ball a little less, or maybe you're guarding somebody else on the defensive end of the court. Things get a little bit different. And so it gets a little shaky too. And then it's just, this problem of building chemistry on the court. This is a young team. There's a lot of freshmen, and even the older guys have not played with each other. They're not returning older guys for KU. They're guys who were seniors and transferred in. So building that chemistry in these games, even though they're not as big of games, they are big games in terms of building that chemistry. That's, I think, where it affects it in the short term the most for KU. I think you could at least, like, say, the glass half full approach would be in the short term. If he's missing games, it would allow some guys like, maybe Kohl Rosario to grow, because they're going to have more shots. They're going to have more opportunities. And maybe that leeway, that leash that, a lot of people complain about year in and year out, that Bill Self didn't give this guy a long enough leash. Bill Self didn't let that guy, play to his full strengths. It would at least give you more opportunity to kind of do that with some of those players. I think in the long term, if this becomes a consistent issue that's plaguing KU all throughout the season, this is obviously something where KU is going to have to figure out how to score in the half court. And maybe it just becomes KU tries to ugly up every game and tries to. The problem with trying to be a bully ball inside team where you're trying to get a bunch of offensive rebounds is you better have big depth, because they're going to get in foul trouble. And KU doesn't really have that. So if you do miss Darryn Peterson for extended time at some point in the season, or miss different games in the season, how KU scores in the half court consistently, that's going to be a huge question for getting them through some of those games. I think just in general, and this goes with that, the shot making, the shooting, those would be questions. Again, do you start to play G and Gall a little bit more? And then the positional size at the guard spots. Like, Kansas isn't an overly big team, but one thing they have going for them is they have pretty good size at every spot. And a big reason why is you have Darryn Peterson, right? So if Melvin Council's your smallest on the floor at 6'3", Kohl Rosario is second at 6'4", and then you have Peterson at 6'5" with 6'10" wingspan, and on down the line, you're going to be okay in college basketball. Now, obviously, that's something that's going to stress you against a team like Carolina, but there ain't many teams in college basketball that can play 6'10" at the 3, 6'10" at the 4, and like 7 foot at the 5. That's not going to happen that often. Duke will be one of those that you play upcoming. But point being, that's something that kind of goes away. Now all of a sudden, you're playing another 6'3" guard with Elmarko Jackson, with a 6'3" in Melvin Council, and a 6'4" in Kohl Rosario, and a 6'7" in Trey White. Now you're a bit of a smaller team, right? It changes very quickly from just kind of one guy there. Overall, obviously, it makes KU's ceiling much lower, makes their floor much lower if you don't have Darryn Peterson. But again, I would at least be a little bit confident in the, like, if they don't have Darryn Peterson, theoretically, in the worst possible world, and I don't think this is going to happen, but like, if Peterson missed every game from here on, I still think this team would be an NCAA tournament team with Bill Self coaching it. Might be some ugly, grinded out games. They might win 20 games and lose 13, but I still think they can get there at that point in time. But that's how important Darryn Peterson is. He could change the trajectory of that to all of a sudden being a team that, could be a 3 seed in the NCAA tournament. That's how talented he is. So they need to get him healthy. Again, sounds like it was a precautionary thing or just weird stuff is going on. But I guess good news that it is just precautionary, and we'll see if he's back for the Prince game. By the way, I feel bad for anybody who bought tickets, like whether it was last minute or, a few days before, being like, oh, we're going to get cheap tickets to go see Darryn Peterson. This will be cheaper than going to like a Big 12 game, or I'm taking my kid. We want to go see Darryn Peterson. You didn't get to see him because of the kind of last minute stuff. I feel bad for you. I'm sorry. All right, that'll do it for this episode of the show. You can find our episodes anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page, where you can like and subscribe. See you next time with Locked On Jayhawks.